guess that most musicians, if they have any success at all, have probably been through one or two or three or four tries at it with other bands. I started as a keyboard player, which was in great demand back in the late 70s, early 80s. There weren't a lot of keyboard players. And I met a gentleman by the name of Presley Haskell who invited me basically into the Milwaukee music scene, invited me to a party, met a few people there. They had sort of an open jam going, played a couple of songs, got approached by a gentleman by the name of Billy Baum, and Billy was looking for a keyboard player, and asked me to come down for an audition, and that's how I got my start. And oddly enough, I was replacing a guy by the name of Stefan Schneider, and I played with the Bombs for, I guess a year and a half, and really wanted to do something else. And Stefan, the former keyboard player, and I had become friends, and the techno thing was just getting off the ground. So I really wanted to do a keyboard-oriented band. So I reached out to Stefan and threw the concept at him, and that's how Color Radio, which is the band that I had some success with, got started. There was a club owner in town by the name of Kenny Baldwin, who owned a place called the Starship, which was an absolutely epic club. Clancy Carroll, I know you've interviewed him, may have alluded to that a bit, may or may not. But Kenny was a really talented drummer, and it was just the three of us, just kind of a techno band. And we had done the Battle of the Bands at the Palms, and we were by far the strangest things there, but the judges decided that we had the freshest sound, whatever the case may be, and decided that we should win that Battle of the Bands. And there was a gentleman who was helping run the Palms at the time who was pretty tight with the rest of the local music scene, and he introduced us to another musician by the name of Jimmy Anelli, who was just leaving a band called the Shivers, who had some success, and we brought Jimmy in to be our bass player, and that's how the band, as it stood, or as what it ended up being in recording, came to be. Early on, I had enlisted the help of a gentleman by the name of Lee Arnold. Lee Arnold was a nationally known radio program director, and that was not necessarily the traditional way of getting somebody to recognize your band, but I thought, here's a guy, he's in town, he's in Milwaukee, he's got a lot of national connections, and I think Lee could probably assist in getting us to that next step. And Lee was actually very instrumental in getting our band signed. He knew a lot of people. So, which would bring me to, in the full circle of trying to be successful, et cetera, is really approaching it as a business. It is a business. You're not just going to get discovered by going out there and playing gigs. You've got to get a team around you of people who you really believe can help you get to the next step. And I can't emphasize that enough. Being in a rock and roll band is a business, and it's work. You've got to be dedicated. You've got to, when I say dedicated, I mean it's a full-time job. It's rehearsing, it's writing, it's going out there and playing gigs. It's a job, and you have to be absolutely passionate about it. And if you want to go somewhere with it, you really have to believe in what you're doing. I think there's some sincerity involved there where people in the record industry can see through it if that sincerity isn't there. You have to have that passion. And I would say we managed to get 4 people together who were really passionate about playing rock and roll and really all believed in what we were doing. And that was, again, I think just that belief was a big part of why we got from a local level to a national level. It was a lot of pounding the pavement and playing gigs. And I'm so far removed now, but at least to my knowledge, I don't think the local live music scene is anywhere near what it used to be back in the late 70s and early 80s into the mid 80s. There was a thriving local music scene. And regretfully, some of those clubs started to close, and there became less and less places to play. That being said, I'm sure there's places out there, and I'm not even sure if the appetite for younger people is really out there to go see local music. I have friends who are in bands, and it's hard to get people in the doors to pay to go see a live band. That being said, we really pounded the pavement and beat up every club owner we knew, not physically, but verbally, and said, come on, give us a gig, and got our start that way. We promoted the hell out of it. And again, I'll go back to that whole business side of it. You know, when I say we promoted it, we did press releases, hired professional photographers for promo shots, et cetera, et cetera. But again, approached it as a business and got enough hype going back in the day that when we did a show, people would show up. And when people show up in mass, people start to take notice. I regret, and I have few regrets in life, and regret might not even be the right word, but I'm extremely envious of what today's musicians have available to them as far as promotion goes. We didn't have the internet. It didn't exist. And it's such an incredible tool. So marketing has become much easier than it used to be, to get out there and to get a presence. I have some friends that have a band called We Banjo 3. They're a Celtic band from Ireland, Galway, and they are masters at social media. They are so good at what they do, and they're also very talented, and they're a very good band. But they managed to get themselves atop of the Billboard Bluegrass charts, not once, but twice in the same rating. They were ranked #1 and #2 as a Celtic band, which has never happened before. I think they're the first Celtic band to ever even crack the Billboard charts. But when you look at Celtic music and you look at bluegrass music, the instrumentation is the same, and the music is extremely similar. It's just Irish folk music really was the roots of American bluegrass. So it's not, I guess it's not that much of an anomaly that a Celtic band finally cracked those charts. But back to my point, they are brilliant at marketing and a web presence. And they're also extremely available to their fans when they play shows. This is something that I've seen in the rock and roll world over the past 20 years, where rock and roll bands didn't do this so much, but country bands and bluegrass bands, after shows, go out, they do meet and greets, not just with a few select people, but with the whole audience. I mean, they'll stand there for an hour or two to have that personal interaction with a fan. And I think these days that kind of thing is really important. You don't need to get signed by a big record company. The band I had was signed to A&M Records, which back in the day was a huge deal. But that was pretty much the only way you were ever going to make it, was to have the attention of a big record company. These days, depending upon what you were trying to do and how much, and how you just envision success, I think you could make an extremely good living playing rock and roll music or playing bluegrass music or whatever the case may be by self-promoting and having your own label and putting stuff out on your own. Things have changed so much from when I was in the music business to what's available now. But then again, that all goes back to getting the right bunch of guys together, and that's the root of all of it. You've got to have a unique sound, good songwriters, and musicians who really believe in what the end game is. At this point, I don't even know that it is. Honestly, I because of the internet, I mean, the world is your local scene now. When I was a kid and when I was young doing rock and roll, the local scene was really important because that was the only way you were going to get noticed. Again, we managed to get noticed. We promoted and we packed places. And because of that, we were able to get the attention of some major label record companies. And again, with the help of somebody who had a lot of connections. These days, again, the local music scene, what's local? Is it the US? Is it North America? There are so many venues now to offer you music to the world that did not exist before. When I was young, if you wanted to record something that sounded halfway decent, we had 2 4-track tape recorders that we would bounce tracks back and forth and do the best we could. But if we wanted to get some really good product out there, the best way to do it was to go into a recording studio, which any decent studio is, you're looking at least a couple $100 an hour. And when you're a starving musician, $200 an hour is a lot of money. These days you can go out and buy GarageBand. Is that what it's called? Is it Garage? Yeah. Do you know? Yeah? whatever the case may be. There's so many programs out there to sit down, and you've got a studio on your phone if you want. It's amazing. So I guess is a local scene important? Yes, it is from the standpoint of maybe just to fulfill your own soul. If live performance is part of what drives you, sure, a local scene is important because it's great to get out there in front of people and play your music and get the reaction. But again, thinking local is going to be the death of any rock and roll band. You've got to think better. You've got to think a lot bigger than local. If again you're trying to do this as a living and be successful as a band. And again, there is no local anymore because of the internet. The world is your oyster. There's just so much potential out there. And part of that is, again, don't be afraid to put people around you who are going to want a piece of the pie to get people to promote you, or people who are experts at what they do, whether it be web design or promotion or whatever the case may be. But again, if your goal is to really make it as a musician, you need to spend as much time on the business end of it as you do on the rock and roll part of it, the writing and arranging and the performance of it. It's all one big package. And if you don't have the business end of it together, you're never going to make it. People aren't just going to walk. Somebody who's going to make it happen isn't just going to walk down the street and hear you one day and say, we're going to put this band on the map. Again, part of being a success is making sure that you're surrounding people, again, from a business standpoint, to your bandmates that all have the same passion that you do and believe 100% that you can succeed as a band. And obviously you better have good songs, be original, but you need to believe in what you're doing, and you need to have people around you that believe in what you're doing, and otherwise you're wasting your time. There are examples like the Sex Pistols that certainly had a lot of raw energy and angst, and right place, right time, but it could be said that some of the members of the Sex Pistols were not exactly brilliant musicians, but they made it. And maybe this is, I'll go to a point that's the sadder part of the music industry, and again, I go back to that whole business part of this, is that somebody once asked the Sex Pistols manager, how on earth this group of guys who could barely play their instruments became as successful as they did. And Malcolm McLaren's answer was, the masses are asses. But, and I'm not trying to diss the art of music, but again, there are ways to make it in music by just fooling the public as well, I guess. And the masses are asses. And Malcolm saw something in this, and he was the genius behind the Sex Pistols and how they took off. And he was able to market what they did and make them a huge success. Again, and there wasn't a lot of raw talent there when you talk about, if we're talking about talent like, virtuoso musicianship. But again, there certainly was a lot of raw passion there. There's no doubt about that. Again, back to marketing. Malcolm saw something there and said, I can market this. And people bought it. And I could be really, a lot of today's music, I got nothing for it. Nothing. I mean, there's no talent there with autocorrect and sampling everything. It's just, to me, it's not art anymore. But not all of it, and there's a lot of great music out there today as well. But there's an ugly part of that whole marketing thing, and that's getting the masses to buy it. So, I guess it all depends. What are your goals in being a rock band? Do you want to make a statement? Do you want to, what is your definition of success? And there's a lot of different avenues to be successful. Personally, I wouldn't want to be in one of the autocorrect sample bands. It just wouldn't make sense to me because I do have a soul and my art is important to me. But there's a lot of ways to make a lot of money in this business, and again, marketing's a big part of it. So, another way to do it is just you figure out what the masses want, and maybe it doesn't have to be nearly as sincere as I believe it has to be and what I've talked about and the passion. But that's a whole other side of the music biz. It's there. Well, it certainly helps to know your local DJs and to warm up to the local college radio stations. We certainly got airplay on WMSE back in the day. That was the only college station going. But that being said, and I was the guy who had approached Lee Arnold, who was our manager, but his job was getting things played on the radio. That's what he did. He ran WQFM at the time, which is a now defunct local rock and roll station. But he had spent years as an independent promoter as well, and his job again was to get things played on the radio. And that was one of the reasons I chose Lee as our manager, because I knew he could get us airplay, and I knew that airplay was important. So, I'm so far removed, and I know there's a whole other venue now to get played on local college radio, which is a great way. It's just another tool that everybody has. And again, it's a different time now. Back in the day, you had to get a DAT tape if you really wanted to play with good quality, but you at least had to send them a cassette, and that meant making the cassette, putting it in the mail, getting it, and hoping they're going to listen to it. Whereas now you can just email a file, and the sound quality is good enough to play it on the radio. So again, it all comes down to, if you figure out who it is you need to talk to at every local radio station and every college radio station, and pound the hell out of it. Get their attention. And if your music's good enough to play, they're going to play it. But again, it's approaching it like a business. And if nobody in the band has really got a good business mind, you better hire somebody who does, because somebody has to have their shit together enough to do the dirty work. The fun part of being in a rock band is going out, at least for me, is going out and performing in front of people. That was the one thing that I got true joy out of. I loved performing. I loved being in front of a crowd. And we all have an ego, and it's a hell of an ego stroke to go out in front of a full house and have people really enjoy what you do. But you've got to have somebody there who knows how to take that to the next step too, how to capitalize on that. And again, get people around you who are good business people. Again, that'd be, if you really want to make it in music, make sure you've got somebody who is willing to focus on the other aspects of being in a rock band, which have nothing to do with playing music and have everything to do with business. And at least when I was involved in the record industry back in the 80s, man, it's a rough, tough, tumble business, man. It's tough. It's hard. It's sleazy. So you better put somebody with you. Again, if you want to make it, get signed to the big deal that is very good at putting up with the sleaze and can negotiate on behalf of the band where the band isn't getting screwed, because most bands end up just as broke as they started, and everybody else is getting rich off of them, and from the booking agents to the record company, et cetera, right on down the line, where there's not much left for the band at the end of the day. So make sure you've got somebody who's really good with the business aspect of that to make sure that doesn't happen. Literally anybody today can make a CD or an album if you wish. You can send it out and they'll press it for you. It's gotten really inexpensive. Anybody can do that. And again, record an album, now what? Now we've got 1,000 CDs sitting in 5 boxes over here, and we've got a stack of vinyl to get rid of. Obviously, you've got to get out there and you've got to start playing gigs, et cetera, et cetera. Because the business has changed, the marketing end of the merchandise end of it has become a bigger part of the industry, and again, there are ways to make it in this business as a baby band, or I shouldn't say a baby band, but you can make it without that major label deal, but that means going out, hitting the pavement, and playing shows, and making sure you've got all your merchandise available, hats, t-shirts, bottle openers, and certainly CDs. But yeah, anybody can make that CD, and again, it goes back to that business part of it. Now what do we do with it? And a CD, if it's good, is no different than a box of Kleenex or a vase or whatever. Somebody's got to figure out, now that we have this, how are we going to go out and sell it? And again, that goes back to getting, if there's not someone in the band, having somebody who is really good at marketing and getting it out there and convincing people that they should listen to your music or play your music on the radio. Again, it's business. It all goes back to that. Anybody can put a CD out. Now what? You know, and now you better have somebody who is very serious about the business end of selling your music, marketing your music. Without that, you're a local band with a bunch of CDs that you can't sell.